Hello, everybody. It is Friday, the 23rd of February, 2024, the last Friday in February. And of course, if it's Friday, it must be That Was the Week, our weekly show with my friend Keith Teare about the state of technology. Keith and I, can't stop thinking about tomorrow. That's the business of this show and the business of Silicon Valley. The real question is that when we think of tomorrow, there are two ways of thinking of it, either as a nightmare in dystopian terms, or alternatively as a utopia, as a future where technology will solve all our big problems. And that is indeed the theme of this week's That Was the Week newsletter. Can't stop thinking about tomorrow. So Keith, are we waking up in the middle of the night thinking about tomorrow in a cold sweat, or are we excited about the promise?
So our AI-generated human being there is meant to be excited. That's what my instruction was. Make him look excited.
Yeah, and he looks terrified. I mean, that's the nightmare of AIR, is whatever you ask it to do, it does the opposite.
But you know, the song "Can't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow," is that the right words? I think that's the right words. And the next line is "Yesterday's Gone." And so "Yesterday's Gone" would almost be a better title this week, because most of the articles or essays in the newsletter project forwards from today what kind of a future we're looking at, and they're fairly substantive essays. Two of them are on the "it's all going to be amazing" side, and two of them are on the "it's all going to hell" side. So it was a split universe. Of course, I favor the first two more than the second two, but there you go. And the title took, normally I spend a little bit of time on the title every week. This week I spent ages on the title. I couldn't figure out what it should be, and so I settled on.
Did you wake up in the middle of the night, Keith, with the title? Is that the face of you? Amazing eureka face, thinking I've found a title for this week?
Well, I did have a weird dream last night.
Oh, tell us more.
The overarching theme of the dream was that I was going back to my hometown.
Scarborough. That's a nightmare, Keith, isn't it?
Yeah, simultaneously with the Reddit IPO. And it turned out one of my school friends was the main lawyer on the Reddit IPO. And my brother was speaking at TEDx Scarborough. It was a very weird dream.
That is a truly. So you didn't dream about Manchester United's young striker getting injured for the rest of the year?
I did not. Well, only for 3 games, apparently.
Well, we'll see. So we can't stop thinking about tomorrow, Keith. As you note, a couple of the essays, interesting essays, all of them this week. One by Evan Armstrong suggests that the future is not even AI, it's the virtual reality which Apple's Vision Pro is realizing. Tell us more about this essay.
So he coins a phrase which is called the killer utility, as opposed to the killer app. And his entire essay is premised on the demand that the Vision Pro can only be successful if we can figure out what the killer app is, and the same with AI. Probably the same with Web3, by the way, that we've talked about a lot. And he makes the point that there are some things where a killer app isn't required, because the utility of the thing itself changes the game so profoundly that every app that used to exist in the past has to migrate to this new utility. And he thinks the Vision Pro and AI are utilities in that sense. They're foundational and will replace previous foundations, at least in part.
Well, let's give credit where credit is due. The term killer app was popularized by my Berkeley friend Larry Downs, who had one of the first big tech hits in books in I think it's from about 1999, 2000, Unleashing the Killer App. What exactly is a killer app, Keith? Because not all our audience are as technologically sophisticated as you.
So I have a good friend who I haven't seen for years. If he ever listens to this, hi, Dan. His name is Dan Brinklin. And Dan created the first ever spreadsheet. for Windows, and it was deemed the killer app. It was before Lotus 123 and certainly before Excel. It was the first ever spreadsheet where you could program, numbers in cells and do calculations. And everybody wanted to get an IBM PC to use VisiCalc. I think it was VisiCalc that he created with some other people. And so the killer app is something you want to use in software that compels you to buy the hardware or the platform. That's a killer app. And clearly I use Vision Pro. Here's my
you're one of you're the classic early adapter. Whatever, if Apple came out with nappies or a diaper, Keith, I'm sure, and a digital diaper, you would buy it. So does this suggest that that the Apple device, the Vision Pro, currently is kind of useless because there is no killer app?
Well, his point's the opposite, that it doesn't need a killer app because it's so useful. And like I'll tell you, last night I had a bit of downtime while my wife was doing something before we settled down and binge watched some TV show. And I put the Vision Pro on and watched the IMAX trailer for the forthcoming Planet of the Apes movie.
Oh my God, Keith, how old are you?
And the IMAX.
How old are you?
I'm when it comes to movies, about 12 and a half.
Yeah, but in real years, you're closer to 70 than 60, right? We won't give away your complete age.
I am.
And you're watching virtual reality
movie trailers. But the key is on the IMAX app. And the IMAX app.
Is that your excuse? Is that what makes it acceptable? Because it was on the IMAX app?
Well, I also watched a wonderfully narrated journey through the universe that NASA had done for IMAX. And why am I telling you this? Because my wife eventually came back in the room when we're going to so I took the Vision Pro off. We have a pretty impressive TV projector on our living room wall. It felt so underwhelming compared to what was on the Vision Pro.
So what does Janae think when she leaves the room and then she comes back and you're wearing this clunky Vision Pro device? Doesn't she think it's a bit weird?
I always slip it off before she enters the room.
So. Oh my God, we're going to quote you on that. I always slip it off when she enters the room. But Janae, if you're watching, I don't know what you think about Keith's Vision Pro habit.
But the point is, the entire platform gives you those kinds of feelings a lot across a range of different experiences. So I agree with him that it doesn't need a killer app. I think it's.
I mean, your living room is a tech paradise. You've got as big a television and sophisticated electronics as anyone. Are you saying that the Vision Pro is leaps and bounds beyond that?
Leaps and bounds. It's not even close. I mean, the only limitation is that it's a singular experience just for one person. So you can't really use it in a social setting. But for an individual experience of media,
How big's your physical TV?
About 120 inches.
And does that make the 120-inch TV, the physical TV, redundant?
Well, it's not a physical TV; it's a projector, so it projects onto a screen on the wall. But yeah, it makes it redundant. Every TV in the house, actually, because we have a bedroom TV. If I lived alone, I wouldn't need any TVs. I'd just use this. I also, by the way, wouldn't need any computer screens.
So it makes all hardware redundant except this one particular device.
It makes the
front end.
The sound system is redundant. Audio devices are redundant. Screens are redundant. Even at a stretch, you could say mouse and keyboard, although it does actually work better with a keyboard and a trackpad.
So is Evan Armstrong's point that this thing there is no need for a killer app because it's in itself a killer piece of hardware?
Yeah, what he calls a killer utility. And he says the same about AI, that, if you think of the list of the top 50 things people are doing with AI, the fact that there is a list of 50 and probably 1,000 is the story. You don't need a single killer application. Although I do think that ChatGPT's chat interface was the killer app in the sense that it made it accessible through a question and answer session.
And does Evan Armstrong, I assume, coming back to the excited man in your AI produced art for the newsletter this week, is Evan Armstrong full of excitement about this? He's celebratory.
Yeah, he's an optimist for sure. He's definitely an optimist, and he likes it, and he's characterizing what he thinks it is. That's basically the.
And there's no nostalgia for him for the physical world, a world of the sensory world, as opposed to putting these devices between our eyes and the world.
Well, I don't think he's even framing that conversation. If you asked him, would you like to be cut off from the sensory world permanently, I'm sure he'd say no, like any of us would. But if you compare the Vision Pro to watching a TV, it's a no-brainer. And by the way, $3,500. When I first bought a flat screen TV, it cost more than that.
You should have bought two. You could have got one for Janae, and then you could have both sat there with these devices, Keith.
Yeah, but even then, the streams
and
are
the
not.
Kids, you could have got four. No, what do your boys think of this? By the way, you got three boys, teenagers, slightly older, in their early 20s. Do they put these things on?
They've all tried it. They all think it's amazing, but none of them are in a position to buy one. They know I'm not going to buy one for them, so their brain kind of flips the switch and they don't lust after it.
Is there a coolness or an uncool factor here? Are the 20-somethings? I mean, some of them can afford it. Are they buying it, or is it just guys like you?
I doubt any of them are buying it, because the younger you are, the more social you are, I think. And this is essentially not a social device. It's a private device.
So it locks you into your own sense as well. Lots more on that. And what about Chen? He also has an interesting take, Andrew Chen.
Yeah,
he sees, as you say, the end of the mobile S-curve and the beginning of the AI one. What's an S-curve?
So an S-curve is a way of characterizing the history of a paradigm. So if you think of mobile as a specific stage in history that roughly starts in 2007 with the iPhone, although some would argue it starts earlier than that. But the mass market for mobile certainly starts in 2007. And he's saying it's now at the point where the S, which is a kind of a up and to the right curve, but on an S shape, has now peaked, and there won't be any more growth in mobile. But the AI curve is only at the beginning, and these S curves are another way of thinking about growth. And if you're a venture capitalist, growth of value. And he's saying that there are still people who will make money from launching mobile apps, but the bar's very high. Whereas if you get into AI, the bar's very low to be, because it's just at the beginning. You can do things that are interesting right away. And so he's basically characterizing the end of an era and the start of a new era, which parallels what the previous author was talking about, Evan Armstrong, because in a way he's saying it's a new era as well.
Although Armstrong's focus on the Vision Pro, how would that fit in with the end of the mobile S-curve and the beginning of the AI one? I mean, Vision Pro is in parallel to the AI age, isn't it?
Yeah, Evan Armstrong sees them as two separate things, and I think Chen would as well. He's only focused on AI, Chen, whereas Armstrong characterized them as being in the same camp because they're both what he calls killer utilities.
What would you say is the quintessential mobile company? I would have thought Facebook, probably.
Well, also ARM, Qualcomm, Apple.
Obviously Apple, that
Android,
Samsung
for sure, yeah.
And then the networking players, the Verizons of the world, and then I mean, obviously, for the AI, the earliest AI company you've talked about this is OpenAI. There are some trying to get from mobile to AI, like Google.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Google had a terrible week with AI this week when it should have been an awesome week. We've heard that story before, but we really don't know the companies yet. I was reminded of you remember Macromedia and
Yeah.
Mark Cantor did Macromedia, and at that time bandwidth wasn't good enough to stream animated video or apps, so everything was put on CDs, and the cloud came later and streaming came later, and now everything you could do with Macromedia you can do at the center of the network, streaming to the edge. AI is kind of the opposite. Everything to do with AI, it requires big data centers and GPUs that NVIDIA produce.
And of course, the big news of the week in business terms was, did NVIDIA crack a $2 trillion market cap? Or it
did, yeah, it did. It's gone back a bit now.
So NVIDIA is also a company of the AI age. Who was the dominant chip maker of the mobile age? Was it Intel?
No, ARM was the architect, but ARM doesn't make chips. It licenses designs. And then everybody who built hardware licensed the ARM designs for their mobile phones, including Apple. So Apple Silicon is actually Apple's version of ARM's designs. And by the way, ARM has doubled in value in the last 6 months.
And then Chen is celebrating this in entrepreneurial terms, in terms of the opportunity for innovators. Is that correct?
Yeah, he's putting down a roadmap to entrepreneurs to focus on AI because the competition is way less. The bar is lower in terms of doing things that no one's done before. And the S-curve has only got an upside to it at this point, probably for the next couple of decades.
And of course, not everyone agrees. Your image of for this week was of a man waking up in the middle of the night looking very excited. But for many, we're on the verge of a new age of darkness. You refer to an essay by Ted Joa, who's a very influential music writer on our state of culture. Joa is not alone in worrying about the current condition of culture. What does he say in his essay?
So he's focused on an equally real trend, which is the trend for human beings to spend a lot of time on short form entertainment, in quotes, largely peer produced, like on TikTok. And he calls it the dopamine culture. He has a very nice graphic that shows for every human endeavor, whether it's sport or gaming or movies, that human beings are gravitating towards small bite-sized chunks that in and of themselves are irrelevant from a cultural point of view. He calls it the dopamine culture, where you just want to get that dopamine hit by laughing or screaming at or lusting after whatever it is, little piece, a morsel, if you like, of content that you're consuming. And he's characterizing that as not unlike your book, The Cult of the Amateur, Andrew. I think there's a similarity in a way between his narrative and that book, where he's decrying the end of real culture, the depth that real culture is associated with.
Is there any truth to this, do you think? You know in your editorial that you can have your cake and eat it. You can go on TikTok and then go to the Berkeley Rep at the weekend. Is that what you believe?
Well, I think what he's saying describes a real set of events, a real set of trends. Human beings seem to like, short, funny, or interesting snips.
Yeah, it's the memification of culture or of the world. Everything becomes a meme.
So people like that. But my objection is, I don't think that means they don't like deeper culture. I mean, look at the success of some of the movies that were recognized at the BAFTAs last weekend. The movies that won are all independent movies with super deep narratives, and many of the people who like those movies probably also look at TikTok every now and then. So I think that what's happening is culture is diversifying in terms of what people like to consume, and they've got more choice. I do think there's an unanticipated consequence that Giola would like, which is it means that the quality bar for movies, theater, music actually goes up, because the time you have to spend on it is less, so you're going to be more choosy. So I would imagine this has a positive effect on the quality of TV or movies.
I mean, Ted Giola is an old guy who's written a classic history of jazz. Is he just another old guy who can't deal with new technology and the cultural ramifications? Every time there's new tech, whether it's television or radio or print or the internet or social media or now AI, you have guys like Ted Giola who are claiming that it represents the end of culture, the end of the world as we know it.
Yeah, I think if it's that binary, then you'd have to say yes. But I don't, and for him, it is actually quite binary. So maybe that is exactly the right characterization of him. That said, the trends he's noticing are not false; they're real. And so the question then becomes, what does it mean?
Well, you're not. When was the last book you read, Keith? You're always telling me you don't have time to read books.
I a long time ago. I do still buy books, by the way, but I
Last
buy
century.
them
Have you read a book this century?
this century. Oh, definitely, many. But
when was the last time you read a book cover to cover?
I think it was that book about the 2008 crash. I'm blanking on the author and the name.
Was
but
that back in what, 2010?
No, he wrote it later than that, but about 2015.
And is that because you don't have the time, the patience? You think you can learn about the world from tweets or TikToks? Or
Well, I read substantive internet stuff every day. By the way, I do buy books and I skim them. Like I bought 3 or 4 books around universal basic income and modern monetary theory to understand what was going on, and I kind of speed read all of them. So I'm kind of lying when I say I don't read books. But if you say, am I sitting down in an afternoon and reading a book cover to cover like fiction? For Us, The Living was the last book I did that with. And Ready Player One I also read.
So the state of the culture is dark, Keith. Are people waking up in the middle of the night in a state of sweat?
I think there's a sense of despair by intellects who can't really engage with modern.
Well, for writers, filmmakers, musicians, it's a tough time. I mean, we've talked about this, journalists. Someone was saying to me this week that they know someone on the Pulitzer Prize committee for investigative journalism books, and there are 50% less books this year because there are probably more than 50% less investigative journalists. And of course, the publishing industry is in its own crisis, a kind of spiraling crisis. And if everyone's like you, then the business is just going to go away. The industry will crash because no one's going to buy these books.
Yeah, no, I doubt that's going to happen. I think people do still buy books, and I think people still go watch movies. Yeah, not always good ones. I mean, look at Barbie, the highest grossing movie ever.
Well, Barbie's not a bad film. I mean, you may not like it. It's not a bad film. I mean, in its own way, it's quite a serious film.
It is a serious film, yeah, but it's evidence of the fact that the world isn't falling, the sky isn't falling.
Well, another way of looking at it is from our old friend Professor Galloway, Prof. Galloway, who talks about Giola talked about the dopamine culture. He talks about the dopa impact on online gambling, which is a real thing, particularly in a post-Super Bowl week.
Yeah, it's a new thing in the States. You and me are both of British origin, and we both probably experienced our parents betting on horse races every weekend. I did anyway. So gambling and sport in the UK are very normal. Here, not so much. So suddenly we're starting to see ESPN now has a gambling operation. And I think about 2/3 of the states, it is now legal to gamble online. And, DraftKings and apps like that are having their heyday because of it. And Galloway is basically pointing to the dopamine driven sucking of money out of your wallet by bad people who just want you to gamble.
Yeah, I mean, my son has a friend, a woman, and whenever I see her, she seems to spend all her time talking about, and she gambles on English football. She seems to spend all her time doing that. I mean, she's interested in the games too, but is this another generational thing?
I think it's hope, isn't it? I mean,
Hope?
I remember my mum used to go to bingo twice a week and used to bet on horses at the weekend, and she did these things called accumulators, which in America are called something else, where all the things you predict have to happen for you to win. And
I mean, it's basically the lottery.
It's like the lottery. And I remember her anticipation about the possibility of winning brought some light to her otherwise difficult life. So Galloway's got it right. It is a kind of a dopamine thing. And then you lose. And as a kid, I just observed the losing. So I never really got into gambling. In fact, I went to the other side. I was a bingo caller for a long time, calling numbers out to people losing money.
I wonder whether anything's really changed. You talk about in your editorial the two alternate universes, one of a drug-like addiction to short form culture and inane culture and taking risk. But I mean, this was something that Aldous Huxley warned about in the 1930s. I'm not sure it was 100 years ago. Has anything really changed? I mean, is there? I mean, this is just the digital version of Soma that Huxley warned us about.
Remind me of what Huxley said, because I read Huxley.
Imagined a world where everyone took something called Soma, which made them cheerful.
Oh, that was the drug. Yeah.
And they watched mechanical golf on imaginary televisions.
Yeah.
Which isn't that different from
I'd
X
say,
or TikTok.
I would say that is one side of what is happening. But if you think it's the whole, then you're missing what the future is going to look like. It's basically, it's a longer conversation than we can have on the show, but I'll say this. We live at a time when people are alienated more than ever from their lives.
What does that mean, alienated from?
They don't get love or an enjoyment out of their existence. And so they take recourse in private experiences that isolate them from all of that. And I think that is symptomatic of the time we're living in, which is the end of the post-war boom, a difficult global situation.
Which war?
The post-Second World War 30-year boom in the economy that you and I were born into.
I wonder though, I mean, you pick 4 very good essays, and you're always putting your fingers on excellent essays. That's why your newsletter is so valuable. I think everyone should subscribe. But isn't that evidence that, okay, we may not have Shakespeare anymore, but we still have thoughtful people like Scott Galloway and Ted Giola writing interesting pieces?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I'm not as pessimistic. I mean, you look at Substack and it's a gold mine of quality writing.
Although this week is one of the few weeks we don't have anything about Substack,
which is even more impressive because they made some announcements and I ignored them.
Yeah, well, that's another story, another week. Your startup of the week, it actually touches back on the Galloway piece, Apple Sports.
Yep.
Why is this interesting? I mean, startup and Apple obviously don't go together, but what is Apple doing with Apple Sports that makes it worthy of this enormous award, Keith, that has such significance? I'm sure that Eddie Q now is going to be so thrilled. He's going to be begging you for more stuff.
I have a lot of advice for Eddie when it comes to sports. But Apple doesn't usually do point apps that are specific to a single thing, unless they're utilities like the calendar or email or a clock. So Apple Sports competes with ESPN directly. And of course, Apple sponsors the MLS, which kicked off this week with Lionel Messi's team winning 2-0. And it looks to me as if
you're the only person in the world who's interested in that.
But it looks to me as if Apple is on a journey where it understands the power of live sports to drive consumer experiences. And, live sports is more dopamine heavy than almost anything.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of gambling, you put together Apple. We began this conversation talking about the Vision Pro. I was just in Mississippi a few weeks ago. We went to a very weird casino near the coast. Is this new commitment of Apple to sports, real-time sports information, and their commitment to the Vision Pro, they're not coincidental? We will put these devices on and we'll be perpetually in a casino, won't we, Keith? Our own personal casino.
Well, the Apple Sports app does include betting odds. So you might be on.
Surprise. I mean, that's why most people use it. Why else would you use it?
Just to follow your team. But
yeah, but that's not true. The vast majority of people are betting.
Well, but you're right. I think that it won't be. They're already producing. They shot a movie during the playoffs of the MLS last season using 3D cameras, and they're about to release it on the Vision Pro, which is, by the way, I've always thought of this concept which we talked about called digital seats, which I imagined as picking a seat in the stadium. They've redefined it as meaning pick any vantage point, including flying above the game. So you can look at the game from any vantage point in a kind of 180-degree bubble, if you will. And I do believe that sport is going to be the killer app, to disagree with our friend Evan, that will bring lots of people to the Vision Pro. Because
unfortunately, quite literally, given the impact of gambling on people, it will be in some ways the killer app. So just explain what Apple Sports does. It competes directly, as you say, with ESPN. What is Apple doing that isn't currently in the market?
Nothing. It's launching an app that has a narrow purpose initially, which is to drive people to subscribe to Apple TV.
Aren't they going to get into trouble from the regulators when? Isn't this a classic example where ESPN will sue Apple and say at the Apple Store, you don't see us, you only see the Apple Sports app?
It's interesting because they made a decision which is not totally unique, but fairly unique for Apple. This app has to be opted into. You have to download it and go and search for it and find it. It isn't going to become a default.
So what's the point of it for them? Where's the business?
The business is that they've invested, by some accounts, $1 billion into Major League Soccer. And they're looking, and it costs about $40 a season to subscribe to Major League Soccer. For that, you see all the games. And I think they're using the app as a driver of potential subscribers into the Apple TV universe.
You didn't respond to my rather barbed remark, Keith, about Major League Soccer in the US, you being the only person watching. Is there really a market for this?
I'm actually pretty surprised that there is. The better teams in Major League Soccer are getting crowds of between 40 and 60,000 people showing up, which means it's bigger than basketball and baseball.
Is it getting is it getting appropriated or embraced by different cultural communities in Southern California or Texas or South Florida?
I can tell you at the earthquakes, San Jose earthquakes, where I had a season ticket a couple of years, it's about 50-50 Latino and white. And, you know, that probably is about right. I think there may be some places like Miami where it's more heavily Latino.
I have to admit, I'd rather look at TikTok than a Major League Soccer in America, but maybe that's
the quality of the game is poor. But if you're an American, I don't know. You know, it's probably better than the Mexican League. It's
yeah, we're going to lose a lot of Mexican viewers, Keith. What a terrible thing to say. Well, if you're Mexican, I didn't say that. That was Keith Teare. Finally, and you're always a good sport here, Keith, because your day job is as the CEO of Signal Rank, and you don't always stuff about the markets and investment and venture capital in. But your X of the week it's by one of your old friends, Packy McCormack, who often pops up on this. It's an interesting X. He says, I'm quoting him here, venture capital gets a lot of shit, but venture capital rocks. What's Packy saying that's so interesting this week, Keith?
So he basically wrote a review of the performance of venture capital as an asset class compared to others. It's a Substack newsletter that he writes, and this was a tweet to promote it. And he goes into a lot of detail about the impact of venture capital on the future. He doesn't really focus on individual fund returns. He focuses on the tolerance for losing money being the price you pay for changing the world, and you end up making money as well. So
very different from your mother working in the food factory in Scarborough and then wasting her money on bingo.
Way better. Exactly. Way better.
Well, what's the difference though? Because most people, even in venture, lose. Most form of gambling still, isn't it?
Oh, it's definitely a form of gambling, but the proportion of winners compared to gambling is much higher. And the amount of the total winnings are bigger than the total money staked, which is different than gambling.
And what's happened, Keith? You used to rhapsodize about venture capital becoming more democratic so that women like your mother would be able to get a bit of the action. Is that happening, or is still, according to Packy, he talks about venture capital being the best asset class there is? Is that because it's still controlled by the Andreessens and the Fred Wilsons of the world?
Yeah, my view on democratization is slightly coming from a different angle, and it doesn't contradict this. It's an adjacency. It's not a replacement. Venture capital basically is smart individuals investing in other smart individuals using their experience to allocate the capital, and that probably doesn't go away. What the bigger question is, who benefits from the growth in value that accrues? And so far, at least, retail investors, normal people, they can only invest after a company becomes public. And so most of the growth has already happened by then. My view is that line will get pushed backwards by various mechanisms, by various people. Signal Rank is one of them, but there's others.
Well, I was going to throw you the best bone you're ever going to get on a Friday afternoon. You mentioned Signal Rank. You're the founder and CEO. Is Signal Rank the killer app of the venture economy, Keith?
You know, no, but it's a very...
No, I gave you, you've got to say yes to that.
No, because I don't think it is a killer app. It's a platform that's going to make venture investing a lot more predictable.
And what's the killer app then of venture? Or is there one?
The killer app of venture, money.